Hello, Matt 4110, 5110, and also TAs or Kim Rogers, Matthew Kennedy here doing my discussion one board for Module 4 about Greek mathematics and their development. And definitely a huge module, a lot of content integrated here in this stuff. So let's get right into it for time reasons. But the goal of today is just having the prompter right in front of me. I want to say 5 things that stood out to me in the development of mathematics from the Greek time period. And then in going through each of those 5 things, I will also be branching off into saying why they stood out, and then also explaining how I can connect it to other coursework, and even as much as with my future students' classroom, being a future teacher. So the first thing was really how many contributors there were in Greek mathematics. That's the first thing that really stood out to me. Got some names down here. Pappus, I'm going to boost some of these names here. Pappus, Heron, Apollonius, Diphantus, Thales, Archimedes, Euclid, Theon, and obviously, other ones. But I mean, it's Plato too, even though he was more of a philosophy person. Just so many contributors. And honestly, that's really a huge point because this will go more into discussion board 2 of module 4. But when we talk about Euclid and his book of principles, yeah, he was the author of it, but it wasn't really just him. Even if it was just one small thing that Apollonius did, or other of these Greek mathematicians, even if it's one small thing they discovered, it still counts as the contribution towards the overall Greek mathematics of that time frame. So one thing that really stood out to me was that thought of this wasn't just 1 or 2 people. Like, it was really a group of people, more than a group. A huge group of people. And when we compare it to the Chinese and Indian mathematics in module 3, and we compare it to the Egyptian mathematics era, huge difference. Not only in the approach to mathematics, but also these famous people. Like, when we think about the history of mathematics, like, let's just say 30 years from now, if someone asked me, Matt, how was your Math 4110 class? I'm going to probably talk about Greek mathematics because that's just where the big bulk of this class are going to be stemmed from, is Greek mathematicians. This is really where the formal approach took off in mathematics. So that was really my main point there. Now, how can I connect this to, my future classroom and my future students? Well, it's really just being aware that it's not just 1 or 2 people that discovered some of these principles in the Greek mathematics. Even discovering pi, and watching that one video in this module, there were 6 videos, but the one that was about pi, right? Did one person just do the whole pi stuff? No. I have the approximation somewhere here. There it is. Egypt came up with 335 divided by 118. That was their pi approximation, right? The Bible had 3 as their pi approximation. And, you just go on and so forth. And, I just got to tell my students, if the context comes up, just hopefully they realize math definitely did not happen overnight, and it's a never-ending process. And likewise, when we think about the Greeks, there were a lot of contributors, and that's what stood out to me for one point. Number 2, that point kind of piggies off of it, but it's still very important. Fame. Euclid, Pythagoras, Archimedes. I mean, these are 3 of some of the most notorious mathematicians ever breathed. I mean, Newton was big, but Newton was more about, science with gravity. And Plato was huge too, but more of the philosophy approach. But when we talk about computational mathematics, we really think about that's Pythagoras, that's Euclid, right? Archimedes. Archimedes with pi, Euclid, you know, Book of Principles, Pythagoras, you know, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And I know that Pythagorean theorem, that it arose in earlier times. It wasn't just Pythagoras that came up with it, but these three individuals, when we think about, you know, like they are the, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, these three people, they were it. I mean, you really think about how, I'm in a class, modern geometry right now, and we're still talking about axioms and postulates that occurred in Euclid's book, notions and proofs and axioms and postulates. I mean, number theory. I mean, if I ever get a master's, right, and I get a master's in math, I'm going to be taking number theory. Primes, composites, what can we do with it? It stems from Euclid's Book of Principles. You know, I mean, so it's just amazing that it just shows you how famous those individuals are. Like I said, if I had to name any mathematician 40 years from now that I learned in this class, Euclid and Archimedes are definitely just inevitably going to be two of the top 5. By the way, and talking about how we can connect it to maybe other courses or maybe my future students, when we talk about circles in my geometry class, I can bring up Archimedes and how he really came to discover pi. If I teach geometry and some definitions and points and planes and Hilbert's axioms in the book Euclidean Geometry, we really can think about where it came from. And I know it's a little bit drier in nature for some high school students, but maybe it'll come up. And they wonder, who came up with this stuff, Mr. Kennedy? And, I can talk to them and say, well, it can, a squared plus b squared c squared, that's, I don't want to get too deep with them, but I'll probably just say Pythagoras came up with it, even though it was used earlier in history. Triples and right triangle trig, all that stuff was used before Pythagoras, but formally, that's where Pythagoras came in. The number 3 point that stood out to me was the application to the life around us. When we, we really think about the levers they used, the warships, and how they constructed, and this was really in the first video, which was like 49 minutes. It wasn't a BBC video, but it looked like a BBC video, but just a different narrator or whatever. But no, like we really think about, and I wrote so many notes here. We think about, and this goes back to Pythagoras, music. I mean, the length of the strings, intervals. We think about architecture around us with the Parthenon, and we think about how the Golden Spiral, right? And just how they constructed these buildings, these theaters. It's all about using math, and definitely some science too, but math, that's where the numbers come in, right? For some formulas and stuff. And even going to the Archimedes screw to get water and stuff, like there's application to life. You want to know where math comes in everyday life. This is where the Greeks come in. We think about Egyptians, and we think about, going into the Indians and Chinese math in previous modules. You don't really see a huge connection. I mean, you see that they had a counting system. You see that they had, commerce stuff with trading and how they, balanced equations to trade and stuff. And you see some, foundational mathematical principles. But we go to the Greeks, the application is through the roof. I mean, these are the STEM kids, right? I mean, you really think about, kids that take things to the next level. I mean, those are the Greeks, man. I mean, these individuals, they took things. I mean, how about the Olympias? I mean, what a ship that was. I mean, you really think that was constructed overnight? I mean, they really took math to the next level. Thales with the solar system and predicting, even about crop work and, when olives are going to be ripe and not. And it's just like they really took some of these things to the next level. And even though some of these things, and also there was a video from one of the universities, not sure what university it was, but also talking about like electricity, static electrons, talking about the levers, and where to put the mass on the lever to get the most effect to move rocks. And it's just like the Greeks did a great effort in really making that connection to everyday life. It's not that they were looking to live life, like just get by. That's what Egypt was. Chinese and Indian math. Chinese and Indian math was a little bit a step above the Egyptians, but you definitely think about the Greeks. Like I said, it's that AP class, if you will, in a high school setting. They're not there to get by and pass. They're there to really go beyond, and they showed it in more ways than science than not. I mean, like I said, there was a huge connection to Greek mathematics and scientific work. And actually, when I was watching the videos and doing some of my reading, I literally said, am I being a science teacher? I mean, because I literally read and watched this video, I'm like, I'm learning about so much about science, because that's how much application there was during this time period to science and application of everyday life. Now, how can we talk about that with other coursework or future students and all that stuff? It just shows you how, if a student asks me, Matt, or they say, Mr. Kennedy, how can we really use math in everyday life? That's where that comes into play. We talk about, how to build a, effective warship, or, how can we utilize math and patterns in the solar system around us to predict the next moon, right? Or the next full moon, right? It's things like that, right? Now, I'm not sure what it was called. I wrote it down, but it's that one thing that they use. It should be back here. Shoot. Planisphere. That's what it was, planisphere. And the planisphere was used to really predict some things in the solar system. So it's big application. It's not just, yay, I can solve for X. What can we do with this mathematics? Number 2 is building off of number 3. It's how, this really was kind of number 3, but number 3 was the application of life around us. So that also goes for just in general, like even architecture and warships. But number 2, the connection to science heavy, that's a big point. We talked about Capston's law, the solar system, all our stuff. I know I kind of talked about it a lot already, but that's a huge point to be made. We really talk about, having interdisciplinary lesson plans, and we learned about that in ETL 2020. You want to teach a lesson that's interdisciplinary. Okay, I'm probably saying that word wrong, but multiple disciplines in one lesson. Math and science can be really intertwined. So it's things like that, where you really think about the connection to science and math. That's what the Greeks were all about. And again, when I relate to other coursework, I can't really connect it a whole lot to the Egyptians. But if I were to say what stood out to me with the Egyptians in being interdisciplinary, I might say maybe economics, right? We literally connect the Egyptians in how they traded and how they, taxed people using their hands and coming up with systems to live everyday life. We can think about that with economics, supply, demand, thinking about things of creating prices in a number system. So we connect that in being interdisciplinary for econ and math, whereas the Greeks were more like science and math, right? And then Chinese and Indians, they were kind of all over the place back in Module 3, but they were kind of in between Greeks, Egyptians, and then in the middle is Chinese. And I said that last week in my video, so I don't want to go on a tangent about that either. The last thing I'll say here, and this is really the biggest point, how formal and advanced their thinking was. I mean, you really think about, proof work. I mean, like I said, book of principles, and just like this is really where math happened. Pi was formal, right? Right triangle trig, and just in general, you even branch it off to like I said, how they constructed and used patterns to. They even used it for their religion, and how they had like fortune tellers, and I forgot the name of the person, but there was like an area where someone could go to seek like advice or whatever, and they would use patterns to give that like the teller, like they would give not advice, but like they would give like they would just say something, and they would use patterns off of that. So like it's quite amazing to me at how formal and advanced their thinking really was for the time period they were in. And I just think that, to be honest, we take away these Greek mathematicians, I really wonder, when would some of these principles come up? If Euclid didn't write it, who would? Right? Would it not come until 1,000 years later? Would it come 50 years after him? Who knows, right? But you really, I mean, there are a lot of proofs, and even angular momentum. That was big in the video that we learned about with that professor at the university, the guest speaker, whatever. But engineering, man, and the technology. And actually, I wrote down in my notes here, a big part about Greek math, why? W-H-Y. Why? That's a big principle in their thinking. They weren't worried about just get X. What and why can we do with this? Or why does this matter? Okay? Like for example, buoyancy, okay, with water. Why does that matter? How can we use it effectively to build a good ship? And that's exactly what they utilized. Some of these scientific and mathematic like formulas, principles, they really live life mathematically in the world around them. And that's the Greeks. So really talking about like how these things can impact me and my future classroom, it's just being aware. By the way, it wasn't Thales, it was Hales. So I think I booched that. But for the solar system and patterns, so sorry about that. I boosted that name. It was Hales, not Thales. Got them a little mixed up. But like, I really just think in general, like, it's just being aware. It's being aware in respecting what these Greeks did, and just respecting not only how much they advanced mathematics, but respecting other disciplines like science, like architecture, like economics, how they have advanced society in those ways. It's not just saying, here's an equation, multi-step equation, calculus and logs and e's and, natural logs, whatever. It's not just dry work. It's respecting them for taking it the step further, than the common man, common woman, and taking it a step further in really advancing our mathematical work that we use today. And it's recognizing, wow, it was not just good, but it was that good that we still utilize Euclidean geometry today. So that's amazing to me. Really all I'm going to say, and also it's really important to respect how many contributors there were. And that was back to my first point, but it's not just Euclid, it's not just Archimedes. There's so many mathematicians out there, but in the Greek, like, group, there's so many. So that's insane to think about. Thanks for your time. 20 minutes is about suffice. We'll go from there. Take care. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.